So we've got 3 hours today, which may sound a lot, but I think our agenda could very quickly be very busy, because the intention of today, we'll go through the intention in a bit more detail, but the agenda is one, a first introduction to the SIG. So ultimately there's a committee of 7 of us currently. We are obviously, this is the first session, so we'll do a brief introduction to what the SIG's purpose is, but then also just a quick introduction to those of the SIG that are in attendance. There are 4 of us today. We'll talk a little bit around the rules of engagement. So the session is largely driven around open discussion, collaborative debate, so to speak. So it's less presentational. It should not be, hopefully not me talking for 3 hours. It should be a number of contributions across the call. We're looking to break out into 2 sessions. So for 1 hour, then a short break around 2:30, 2:25, and then a breakout session again shortly after, both on the same topics, and then we'll come back together to talk through summary as to what we talked around, and then also give you an opportunity to feedback via a very short SurveyMonkey poll around how the day went, but then also what topics you would like this SIG to focus on going forward. Because the whole premise is that we are not here as a committee with the answers. We've got some thoughts and answers, but we are harnessing the views from across industry as to how we shape this SIG going forward. So that's how we'll leave the session at 4 o'clock UK time, is with a kind of an output as to what's coming next. Before we dive into it, Mark, are you all right to jump off mute for this, or do you want me to do it?
That's fine.
We'll just start the session with a quick health, safety and wellbeing moment. Mark?
Yeah, sure. Afternoon, everyone. So for those who don't know me, Mark Baybutt, we'll get on proper introductions later, but I'm one of a number of heads of risks at National Highways. And we kind of, obviously, a lot of us focus on our safety culture, so we just thought worthwhile spending a bit of time on a safety moment. So this predominantly around the original timing of this session was as people were kind of setting off on their summer holidays and probably traveling around our strategic road network in doing so. And so just a reminder really to check your vehicle. Something that we all do, I'm sure, is travel on the road network, and to check your vehicle properly before you set off. Bit of an analogy, well, similar situation. I was on a flight a couple of weeks ago, and they did their pre-flight checks and found a fuel leak, so we ended up having to get off the plane and give them a couple of hours to check that out properly before we took off. And actually just a reminder that, you know, maybe slightly less significant, slightly less kind of extreme risk with driving, but nonetheless a significant risk to health and safety. So make sure you kind of do the standard checks before you head out on the road network, because it's a very uncomfortable place to be at the side of a motorway if you've got an issue with your vehicle. And if you want more information on that, I'd signpost you to our National Highways website.
Great, thank you, Mark. David's added, don't forget to check your well-being pressure too. Exactly that, and very topical. Just a quick one around IRM membership. It's also renewal time, if not, it's past renewal time as well. But yeah, ultimately this SIG is open to both IRM members and non-IRM members. So there's a number of I guess membership levels you can apply for, from affiliate to student to certificate to technical. And there's a whole host of reasons. I've just hopefully stuck the link to the IRM website in the chat for anyone interested in joining. So in terms of the SIG then, and it broadly links to the IRM membership, because it was around this time last year where I think I challenged the IRM around risk leadership and the content we were getting in our community, and therefore I was challenged by the IRM to set up this SIG. So the purpose of this SIG has been set out to drive improvement and consistency in how risk leaders behave, shape and inform senior stakeholders to enable proactive decision making. We believe there's a current gap both in the IRM's content, guidance, and also then across some of the other SIGs that is not currently providing risk leaders with the support, the case studies, and ultimately then the training they'll need both from a here and now perspective, but also in areas of development and training for future leaders. Now that's key as well. We're not looking to pigeonhole this SIG as to those within those risk leader roles or that certain experience. It's also around how we develop future risk leaders and give them the exposure that some of us maybe didn't have in the positions that we are. So, and then the final point is around, which is why I say bear with us today, is around the intent of what we're trying to do on this SIG. So the SIG is intending on harnessing the thoughts and opinions of you, the participants. The majority of our events will be open collaboration events driven by discussion and debate rather than presentations, to hopefully move the dial, i.e. agreeing or at least coming to common and improved understanding around risk leadership. So you should have, for those that have registered leading up to it, you should have had access to the mural board. We've got new mural boards that we'll send round once we go into the breakout area, but that will be the crux of how we operate today in terms of using the content that's been pre-populated, as well as give people an opportunity both verbally and out within mural to then add more thoughts to that. So very quickly, just before we get going into the crux of it, it's just an introduction to our risk leadership SIG. In terms of just a bit of background, so we got approval by the IRM in December last year around the SIG that it merited a standalone SIG compared to the existing IRM SIGs. We then went through a process, I think it was Q1 this year, of a number of workshops of up to, I think it was about 30 or 40 attendees who had expressed an interest in supporting this SIG. And we walked through thoughts, challenges, etc., and have ultimately landed on this committee as it currently stands. So myself, and apologies I didn't introduce myself, so Graham Nicholl, I'm chair of the SIG, but also head of risk and controls at Leeds. I think I've alluded to the reason why I'm here. Val, do you want to introduce yourself? Still on mute, Val.
Sorry, first person to do that.
Yeah,
Val Jonas, CEO of Risk Decisions Group. I jumped at the chance to join this. I'm really interested in risk leadership, but basically I love any opportunity to have conversations with people about risk, whether we agree or disagree. I'm always learning, and I think you've got to do that by having risk conversations.
Great, thank you, Val. Mark?
Yeah, afternoon once again. So as I said before, so Mark Baybutt, I'm head of risk and change management at National Highways in the unfortunately acronymed Regional Investment Programme. So I similarly have worked on many different kind of infrastructure projects and programs, and always found it sometimes a bit of a challenge finding who's best to reach back to. Whilst there are colleagues available, sometimes some of the situations we come across could do with a more of a round table discussion to resolve and help bounce ideas from like-minded colleagues. So again, jumped at the chance to be part of this to have that slightly more round table discussion.
Thank you, Mark. Ian?
Yeah, I'm one of the later committee members. Saw who was on the committee, thought it would be good group of people to bounce some ideas off. Industry's growing at a pace, so I know that there'll be a lot of people who probably could do with a bit of extra support, people in probably more senior positions than they normally had for those sorts of level of experience. So, you know, to set up this committee to provide that support and guidance is what I'm interested in.
Great, thank you, Ian. And yeah, apologies today from Ashley Mulroy, who's our deputy chair, Tom Clare, and Jason Cousins. Jason Cousins may join us later on, but he has sent us apologies initially. One other note is just, yeah, if we are still open to adding new committee members. I think we've found, even in the last 2-3 months, getting it organised for this event, the more hands and willing parties, the better, I think. So yeah, if you are interested after the discussions today, if we are on the right path with you, I guess, is to register your interest with one of us and consider getting you involved. Okay, so now talking, we've just got a couple of slides just to set up and then we'll then go into breakout rooms in the next 5 to 10 minutes for the majority of the afternoon, and then come back in. Now, what we're looking, or as what we're keen to talk around, is just the rules of engagement. Participation is key today. As said, we are looking for open discussion and debate around the key topics. So we've set a number of questions on the mural. We'll revisit them just now, just to set the scene. Everyone will have the opportunity to either contribute to the mural or verbally. We are, what are we on? We're near 30 participants today. So between the two rooms, we'll have between, say, 10 to 20 participants. That typically is a little bit of a challenge around facilitation, but we're keen to give everyone an opportunity. So please raise your virtual hand to speak, and then once prompted by one of the committee, so please come off mute and camera if preferred. If not, stay off camera. There should be 2 of us from the committee in each room to facilitate and move around, and it'll be trying to keep open discussion, try not to get too much down rabbit warrens as well, so to give everyone opportunity. There are no wrong answers, so please respect others' views and inputs. We will leave the mural boards open post session so participants can contribute. And as we said from the outset, the session will be recorded for the purposes of the SIG only. So if you're not comfortable on camera, do come off. And then also, just as a kind of caveat, it will not be distributed for any other reasons. Once we go into the breakout sessions, we'll hopefully it'll split the room in half, and then there might be a little bit of playing around to make sure myself and Ian are in one room and Val and Mark are in the other. But then we will then do a short warm-up session. So while there's been good level of engagement on mural before the workshop, we'll just do a quick session to warm people up as to that this will be the space that they'll be working in. So we will, for the first 5 minutes in the breakout, we will look to test or just get you familiar with the ability to add a new post-it note. Typically, you just double click on the screen and a post-it note will come up, and it'll be based on how you're feeling about today's session and the representing animal. Now that will all become clear in a minute. Don't worry, there's nothing too strenuous. Then in the breakout sessions, we'll then look to cover the questions that we posed. So as a SIG, we were back and forth a couple of months ago around how this first session would cover and the sort of topics to hone in on. Now we've targeted stakeholder engagement and governance decision making in this first session because of what we believe the similarities, but also there's certain nuances between these that we may want to consider. So ultimately, we will look to cover both the barriers and challenges that we've encountered in relation to stakeholder engagement and risk management. And then the flip side then is what methods have we used that have helped overcome that. So ultimately what we're trying to understand is what are the challenges, and then what potentially are the examples that we can take away and we can share with not only this community but also industry as to the sort of things they should be thinking around. The exact same is applicable on the governance decision and making aspects. What we'll look to talk around is what are the principles of good governance that are essential to risk management, and then how do risk leaders best leverage the interconnected relationships. Now there's a number of points that we'll talk in more detail in the breakout rooms, but that was just to set the scene. So each breakout room will discuss question 1 for near enough an hour. So the timings are in the top right, and we're so far on time. So question 1 will, after the warm-up session, we'll go from 1:30 till 2:25. There'll be a 10-minute break, comfort, coffee, whatever break, and then question 2, 2:35 till 3:30, and then we will end the breakout rooms at 3:30 to then come back, have a short summary on the breakout sessions, and then walk through the kind of feedback poll to then leave or end the SIG on the note of how was it for you, as well as then what shall we focus on going forward. Any questions before we hit the breakout room and we go our separate ways?
Okay, David has a question. Do we have an agreed definition of risk leadership? Oh, well, Graham, I think we probably debate that in our breakout rooms. Do you have any? So.
I think so. I think what we've found in the initial interest workshops, so to speak, for the SIG, but then also the discussions we've had within the SIG is that it's multi-layered. I think that's a lot of, not only around, I think some of the point on this slide talks to it, where it's not just around the risk professionals, so to speak, and what's expected of them, but it's then also around the relationships, dependencies, as well as then I guess the leadership of an organisation, a project, a programme. So at the moment, I would say we don't have an agreed definition of risk leadership. I would say that we are looking to hone in, develop that understanding a little bit more. Now, there may already be definitions out there, but I think what we've found is a number of levels it can apply differently. Yes, exactly that. So what David mentioned in the chat, for those that may not see it, is like risk management. It's not just what the risk managers do, and that's ultimately what we're looking to cover as well. Is that risk leadership is not just there'll be a large percentage around what the risk professional does, but there's still interfaces and other elements to consider on that. But
I think the
idea
idea of the membership of this group is that, or people who attend these sessions are not just risk managers; they are people across organisations.
Absolutely. Yes, agree. In part, Deborah. Yeah, it's not only just around the people. It's not only around what they're doing. It's then also how it then intersects for a number of reasons. Okay. Agreed, David. So yeah, so risk leadership isn't just what risk leaders do, but how the management of risk needs to be led across the organisation. Now, this is set up nicely for the chat and discussion in the breakout rooms, and the key is open discussion. Let's bounce ideas off each other, and let's capture it that way. So, any final questions? Yeah, wink face, exactly that. Any final questions before I hit the button on breakout rooms? It will just split us half and half without any other way. No. So I will. There may then be just a need to tidy up that the co-hosts are in the specific breakout room. So just bear with us for a couple of minutes, and then we'll get the mural board up and shared. We'll then also share the link to the mural board in those meetings. So we're all working on the same one. Let me just double check. It's actually giving me a choice. Yeah. To move people. And then if I get to watch me, my dreadful technology. All right, I think we're good to go. So you should now have received a message, and people will be going now. So breakout rooms. Craig, you've got mine. See you in a minute. Dennis, Mohammed, Richard, you should have had a message about a breakout room. Good, good. Right.
Back to share it now. 2 seconds.
And in the chat, I used a separate mural board ahead of the meeting, so they've now stuck a new mural board in the chat. So if you want to access that and add posts, you can do. Well, we would like you to for the first warm-up session, and then we will just mute. Can you all still hear me? I hope so. So we have now, yeah, we see that some people are joining the board, and please come off mute when you wish to speak. But Ian's kindly shared the mural board. So to start off, just as a bit of fun, just as a warm up, just to see how we can use the board, i.e. double click. If you double click, then a post-it note should appear, and then you can put your initials on it. What we're trying to just gauge for people first and foremost is how are you feeling today? So we've, as the warm-up session suggests, if you can double click and create a post-it note, put your initials on, and then put it next to the picture or description that best suits you. Ian, you might want to hit refresh just in case there was that issue this morning. Question.
Sorry, could you say again how to get into the mural? So I've clicked the hyperlink from the.
So if you click the hyperlink.
Can everyone hear okay?
Yeah, I can hear whoever's just spoke up.
This is why we've done a little warm-up session, just to kind of give it a bit of time. So yeah, there's a number, just to test the process, there's a number of ways how you can add a post-it note. You can either double click and it will appear where you've just double clicked, and then to put text on it, you double click on the post-it note, or you can right click, add post-it note. I think it's you, Ian. For whatever reason, it's you that's causing the background noise, mate. So I don't know. I just muted you, and you're it's a little bit better. So don't worry. You can just prompt me via chat. All right. How are we doing? Craig F is delighted. I'm sure that's tongue in cheek, that is. Absolutely. And Craig F's done too, by the looks of it. Needs more coffee and he's delighted. Good. Afros needs a nap. And has no idea what he's doing. So do I. That's what I'm doing as well. But bear with us. This is more just a quick test around functionality. We've got a number of post-it notes, themes, etc. on the main board that we'll then we can talk around. So it's not going to be, there's not going to be a specific need for you to be in Miro and playing around with it unless you want to be adding thoughts to that. Okay. Has everyone managed to add a post-it note? Is there any problems that we just need to test?
Hi, it's Deborah here.
No.
I can't seem to get post-it notes working.
No.
It might be because I'm using an old laptop. I don't know, but it might.
Yeah, what Explorer are you in? Internet Explorer?
I don't know. I can't use this on my work one, so I've borrowed one from my son. So it's a very old laptop. It might just be that I haven't got functionality on this.
Can you see the content?
I can see it, yes. So I can click in at any point.
Yeah, so fallback, where as always with technology, is a challenge is do raise a hand or do speak up when we get to the main board, because that's a key point rather than which dog or cat you are, and then we can cover that.
Will do.
Well, I'm a bit lost in that I'm not quite sure. I'm able to go to what I think is the main board, but I'm not seeing what I'm seeing on your screen.
So just I'll send it again, Richard, to you direct. There was a new mural board put in the chat of the group.
Oh, I see. I see. I had the chat up and the chat's gone away, but I'm okay. I see what you're saying. So
I've just resent it to you directly, so you can.
oh, good on you. Gotcha.
No,
Thank you.
This is part of why
Better.
we wanted to just test ourselves.
Yeah, well, I went out and grabbed myself a drink a moment ago. I mean, I've got different type. I've got to keep myself awake at this end.
No, I know, and I saw you leave at the exact same moment. I then split everyone into groups type thing. So it was. I'm glad
I picked the wrong time.
I'm glad I didn't lose you in the mid.
No, I'll find my way back.
Good. Right. So we'll get. What time are we now on? We're on 1:30. So we'll get going on the key point of why we're here. Now that was just a quick use or quick test around functionality. So just to clarify, as we go through the board, we've got a number of inputs from pre-workshop that we will summarise, talk around the content. We'll then look for I guess hands, anyone that's got a burning desire to talk about those topics, and then we can then, as we've alluded to here, add new post-it notes if there's topics that we want to cover that aren't currently covered. Deborah has said, or anyone that's struggling to add a post-it note, just raise a hand and just do it verbally between me and Ian. We can add the post-it notes as we go. So Ian, do you want to scroll across, please, to the main board?
I'm just checking from my side, Graham. Not taking my video off. It's a lot better.
No worries. Yeah, your sound's better as well.
I can't see any hands up at all.
I think we're good to go.
We're good to go. So
Yeah.
shall I move on to the?
Yes, please move on to the main board. We'll start with stakeholder engagement. Monitoring participant. Hold on. I've just got. So typically we've got some late stragglers. They might as well come into our room because I'm the one that came up with this idea. So if there's any question. Kevin, welcome.
Okay, do you want me to zoom slightly?
Yeah, zoom slightly in on the so it's just the stakeholder one if you can. Kevin, June, welcome. I appreciate you just joined. We are going to cover the key topics or key questions around, well, some key questions, key topics around risk leadership. Within the chat, there should be access to the mural board, so you can access and input post-it notes by double-clicking for a new post-it and then add the topic. But we are literally just about to start, so it's up to you whether just listen in and contribute verbally or whether you want to add to the mural. Okay, so to summarize then, and then just to kind of set the scene, so we're looking to cover stakeholder engagement and we're looking to cover governance and decision making. Now, we will focus on stakeholder engagement for the next 55 minutes until 2:25, and then we'll break for 10 minutes to give everyone a break away from this mural board. So first part of that question is around the barriers and challenges. The second part, which is at the bottom half of the mural board, is around the good examples around that. So the first question is around, as a risk leader, what barriers and challenges have you encountered in relation to stakeholder engagement? Now, that may include interdependent relationships across organisations and projects, so say between departments such as commercial or legal, or between specific roles, i.e. cost estimating, planning, project management, etc. It may also be around the challenges and opportunities we may face in terms of the relationship, in terms of vertical relationships with CEOs, CFOs, project directors, etc., as well as then those horizontal relationships. Also, do consider opportunities that risk leaders have to influence and enable stakeholders. Now, some of the input data that we had before the workshop and the dark green post-it notes are around. Hold on, I've got 2 unassigned. I'll just add them to my room just to see that. So the dark green post-it notes are what we received around this topic before the workshop. So they're around stakeholder underestimating the complexity of risk. Senior managers often reward firefighting instead of proactive risk management. Risk management team are unable to demonstrate or articulate the benefits of risk management in a coherent manner, losing senior leadership team or teams with theoretical jargon. Varying levels of risk management understanding can lead to a lack of prioritization of limited resources to address risk issues. Preconceived risk answers drives negative bias by senior leaders to influence, manipulate the risk process. An immature approach to risk management underpinned by knowledge, biases and risk culture can lead to a negative view of risk and ultimately engagement and buy-in. Time restraints, declaration of critical incidents, system-wide challenges, colleagues working clinically, focus away from governance duties. Perception by the business that engaging with risk and compliance functions will slow things down. Reluctance to engage risk and compliance at the ideas stage and holding off until an idea is fully formed. Risk still seen as a historical and or negative assessment rather than proactive approach to strategic decisions. And siloed functions have limited understanding of the risk stroke impact their activities have on the business. So those are the topics that we received pre-workshop. There may be other ones, but I guess having summarised them, is there any topics that anyone wants to open discussion on?
Are we going to go through, sorry Graham, are we going to go through the other elements first and come back and go through these and expand on them in more detail, or is this a chance now?
Yeah, we'll focus on, we'll focus on this quadrant now for the next, say 20 minutes, and then we'll then move on to the good examples of stakeholder engagement, and then post break after half 2, we'll go to the governance and decision making one. All right.
Good, Graham, I was just wondering, so I haven't quite assimilated it all, but just looking at all of those, what are the common themes that come through this? And it's sort of an element of, yes, people expressing an interest on the firefighting or on the things that they're interested in. There's an element of knowledge and different levels of knowledge and resource pieces around this. And yeah, I sort of, I mean, in terms of that reluctance to engage risk and compliance at the idea stage, these kind of, I was maybe thinking of those as the trend pieces, and maybe you take the, how might we find solutions to the problem? So it's almost, you've opened up a question, but then actually the problem is what elements of this are we identifying?
Sorry, Kevin, you've got your hand up. No. Kevin.
I did. Yes, thanks very much. Apologies, I haven't had time to add a post-it note yet, but I'm just looking through the bureau just now. I think one of the things that I've come up against, and so just a bit of background, I work in financial services, and yeah, some of the challenges I've come up against is a kind of cultural challenge, and almost from kind of 2 different perspectives. One of which is that I guess risk and risk management can still be seen as not everyone's job, and only the job of the people who have risk in their job titles, which can be quite challenging. But also, I feel that there's still this kind of culture of wanting to absolve themselves of blame. So there's almost the kind of perception of, you know, if I don't speak up, then nobody will think it's my fault that this has went wrong. And also once blame has been, you know, firmly apportioned, then it's almost an opportunity for leaders to kind of jump on that and make sure that everyone knows whose fault it is, and it's definitely not their fault. So that's some of the challenges I've come up against.
Good, thank you, Kevin. Anything to add around that, around where it's not seen as everyone's job or responsibility? Deborah, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, just find my way around this screen. It's the interconnectivity pieces. So it's when you have something that transposes across more than one department or one area, and it's a not me, not them, whatever. I've challenged that and used those as orphaned risks.
Yes.
So we class those as orphaned, and then they go into the next level of board, and also changing and talk about culture there. It's to do with the language that you use by making people managers and lead. Sometimes you're softening the language is what we need to do to enable the culture to change a little bit. So yeah. I've actually I've ended up changing the names of things to make people facilitating things and such like, and it takes the sting out. Sounds silly, but it does the same job.
No, it's a very good point, and it leads into some of the I think there was one there, the top row, third along, where it talks around theoretical and jargon. Sometimes people get scared around the risk language, and sometimes it's key to, as you said, to soften it, or because ultimately what this is not, and again, coming back to Kevin's point, it's not about pointing fingers and blaming. It's around how we engage and we get that buy-in, or at least that acknowledgement that there's something to be tackled. Any other views? Sorry, Deborah.
So I was just going to say that what I've been having to do with mine is just to get them to understand that, but they become the superhero rather than the villain.
Yes.
Effectively, it's swapping the brain way around just by naming it in a different way.
No, and yeah, building on that, that's something we've seen success on across teams. Is that by promoting the superhero element, it suddenly drives a culture of others aspiring to be that, rather than it's not my concern. We've seen that both in kind of league tables or even project team performance, etc., where they're managing risk proactively and putting them on a pedestal. You suddenly see a wider cultural change happen because they all strive to be that way. Okay. Anyone else? Any other?
Yeah, I've got a specific view. Looking at the original post-it notes, the two that are side by side, the one about perception by the business that engaging with risk and compliance functions will slow things down, and the one next to it, reluctance to engage risk and compliance at the idea stage and holding off until an idea is fully formed. I think those two are very much interrelated, and I've sort of added my own interpretation to that in terms of a comment that the risk team in many places, and I've experienced it many times, are sort of seen as getting in the way of managing projects and programs. You know, oh no, they're here. And as soon as you enter a virtual team meeting or you introduce yourself as a risk manager, everyone goes quiet and everyone buttons up and don't want to say anything, because someone like me will then say, oh, have you considered this? Or oh, that's not a risk, that's an issue, or actually that is an issue and you haven't considered it. And they feel a bit embarrassed, or, oh no, we've got the risk manager complicating things and it would have been better if he wasn't there in the first place.
No, absolutely. And there's I'll pick on Craig, but me and Craig have had a career of that and similar where one where I don't think risk hasn't been involved at the outset, and therefore the goalpost or the envelope, or whatever you want to call it, has been set, and therefore the management of risk in that is challenging. Similarly, as you've alluded to there's a negative connotation around it, and I think we get to some of the examples below where you can be positive around it, and it's around actually by proactively managing risk, you can enable a project or a program or even an organization. But it's still, I think everyone on this call would associate risk with threat first and foremost, and that's how a majority of people see that, and it's how we ultimately have to bring that opportunity element to it, or that positive element to it, risk will always be seen, well, not always, it commonly is seen as a negative, isn't it?
It is, and I mean, I know, you know, I'm one of those individuals who's undecided whether we want to have risk as a positive and a negative, which is what you're basically saying. You know, negative is a threat and a positive is an opportunity. I know risk managers who say that is garbage. A risk is negative. You know, if you ask the average punter on the street, when you say the word risk, they'll say danger. They won't think benefit.
Exactly that, and it kind of comes back to some of David's comments at the start around that definition, and I think that's why we're here as a SIG, and then also this discussion is that there's a number of definitions that aren't quite as they seem, or as how we want to go with them. Good, thank you, Afros. Rathe, you had your hand up.
Yes, hi. Good evening, everyone. So, what I feel that you know, as a risk management manager, rather, for a project management point of view, there has been at a lot of instances the analysis of the risk that we foresee. So, like the early participant already mentioned that you know, the proactive way of assessing the risk is very important, and if you don't have a proper database for that, so that becomes a really challenging part, I think, at a leadership level also. Analysis, a well-defined analysis is one thing if not supported by, you know, a good data. So that becomes sometimes that becomes a big hurdle.
Yep.
And another thing is that you know, the first line and second line, if the structure is not well defined, if the responsibility and specifically the board oversight is not there, and the tone at the top is not proper, which has, so risk management culture setup has to be from top, you know, top to bottom. It can never be from bottom to top. So these are the two aspects, if not dealt properly, I think becomes are very challenging.
Good, thank you, Rathe. Any comments on those points before I bring Craig in? He's been waiting patiently. No, Craig, on you go.
No, I've been playing nice, put my hand today. I've put a couple of kind of post-its down at the bottom there. I think one of the main kind of drivers is, and I know it's a bit of a catch-all, is the capacity and capability of those two that we're asking to engage to actually be able to engage.
Yeah.
A, do they have the time to do it meaningfully? And B, do they know what they're being asked for and what they're actually able to put in?
Yeah.
And that, I find that one of the biggest barriers, because that then leads to them A, not believing the outputs, or B, not just being fully engaged in general. And as risk professionals, as potentially not getting the information we need in order to which to do our job correctly. So I find that actually probably one of, I know it's quite a simple thing that is a catch-all, but it's probably one of the more key things.
Yeah.
And a couple other ones are probably from bad experiences previously. That's not myself included, but people, if they've had a bad experience with risk being managed incorrectly in a previous project, they just will not. It's a hell of a boat. It's a hell of a ship to try and turn at that stage.
Yeah.
And then the other bits is like integration with the other functions. If you're not all pulling in the same direction with the other disciplines and areas, you're all saying different messages, you're not pulling in the same direction, you're not getting the right engagement therefore. And the biggest one is if the output of risk conflicts with what's getting the message or the overall story that's getting managed in terms of political message, if that's always a massive barrier which you have to kind of base your terms of engagement on.
Absolutely. So yeah, building on those, the capability and capacity pieces is key around coming back to that interdependent relationships. It's how do people understand that it's not just the risk professional or the risk manager or whoever's responsibility for risk. It's understand how they all tie it all together. Now, that comes down to communication. It comes down to even probably a bit of training, a bit of how you coach people through. Hold on 2 seconds, I'm assigned participant again. Then the key is it still boils down to the benefits as well, as how are we promoting the benefits of risk, so it's not seen as in what we've alluded to there, a historical or negative. It's not going to slow the project down, etc. If you do it in a right manner, it will enable your work and help you out in that sense. What else did you have? You had, yeah, past experience. I think as an industry, we are often challenged on the benefit and what does risk actually bring to a project. Where I think it's often a challenge that what's gone before causes that perception, I think, and rather than the forward looking, the benefit of it and the outputs, so to speak, and the negative or the story is one of the ones. I think it was one of the ones I put up in terms of the preconceived risk answers as then manipulated or dulled down, diluted, however you want to call it, is key. So yeah, all good points. I think ultimately what we're trying, we are a number of kind of project bits, but we've also covered organisation. I think that's just something to be mindful as we go through, as we're looking to cover all aspects. Richard, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks.
You still awake? You still awake, Just?
Yeah, one eye at least. Yeah, there's so many reasons why stakeholders may not engage. And when I say stakeholders, I'm usually thinking of senior leaders, executives, boards, or a project manager or someone senior enough to be involved in a conversation around a particular challenge, problem, risk, whatever you want to call it. Some of the, and by the way, whenever I see that happen, I always ask the question, is it really just, if you like, this leader being an individual who really doesn't want to handle risk for whatever reason, or is it really systemic in the organization? Is the organization setting leaders up to fail if they tackle the hard issues, et cetera, et cetera? So it's an interesting question to look behind the behaviors of stakeholders and why they're doing what they're doing. But there's some pretty simple ones, like I've met many stakeholders who don't want to get engaged in a risk conversation. They just want the solution. They want you to tell them the answer, but partly because they're overloaded. They're already overworked. And it's a catch-22 because they're already probably, if they're overloaded and overworked, it's quite likely they're set up to be overloaded. In other words, they've got a role in a task or whatever they're doing where they just haven't got time in the day. But by working in that way, they tend to exacerbate the problems. And when they don't actually deal with the real problems, they then get more crises and they get more workload, and it's a catch-22. But people are often afraid that if you try to engage them in the conversation, as opposed to just tell them what the risk is and what they've got to do about it, or ask them if they will do something about it, that they're going to get overloaded. But also they might, I often see fear in leaders, fear in the sense that they're worried that they're going to get shown up by not understanding the detail or not understanding what to do about it, or not being capable of diving into the detail of something, not because you're a detail person, but because you need to understand enough of it to see what's going on. And they don't know how to do that because they haven't been taught how to. It's not traditional thinking. It's actually more systemic, more the complexity thinking. So they get lost in that, and they push back, and they expect you to give them the answer again because they're afraid of getting into the detail. I could wax lyrical for hours on this, so I'll just stop there.
No, that's all good stuff, all really good stuff. Any comments initially around what Richard also said?
Yeah, Ian here, if you can hear me. Sorry, I'm having some connection problems. Totally agree that with Richard, that you'll normally find that if they haven't got enough time for risk, they normally haven't got time for a number of the other parts which are important into delivery of a project, if we're talking at project level. So you'll find that the cost management isn't always to the right level, the planning isn't always to the right level, and it isn't always specific to risk. I find, as someone who worked as an independent consultant, that it's quite a big question you ask. The market's quite buoyant, so you can be in a position where you can be quite picky about the gigs you take on. And the level of maturity and commitment to risk is quite a big deciding factor as whether you want to join somewhere or not. So, I totally agree with Richard.
Just to double check, Ian, because you've had that connection challenge, I've just jumped on. Can everyone see my screen and me moving around like that very quickly? Sorry.
Yes.
That makes people feel they're in a washing bowl. Peter, sorry.
Yes, okay. I'm just moving the conversation onto a slightly different thing, but I perfectly agree with Ian and Richard. Spot on. Sometimes with stakeholders, it's a matter of their ability to actually describe the risks that they've identified, and before, if you leave them to their own devices, before you know it, the risk sort of covers every possible incident or event that could happen. So and then later on they go back to the risks and they find that they've completely forgotten what the actual risk was if you don't sort of hold their hand to try and get them to focus on what's the actual uncertainty around that risk. So that was
absolutely, and again, I'll use my time at HS2. A key point around that is that we got challenged by the DFT around the believability around the risk profile. Now we did a number of different approaches. One of them was a kind of Dragon's Den type approach in front of the CFO, where you tested the various teams, design, civils, whatnot, whatever phase it was, to present the risk. And the key discussion point was around what is the risk, what are you going to do about it? Quite simply, removing all the noise around how much it would cost or the full impact, pushing the onus and the accountability onto those teams to fully own it as to what the risk profile is, and then also then the next step, what you're going to do about it. And that what we saw then was a much, I wouldn't say richer risk profile, but a risk profile that you could feel the project team or the teams were bought into a lot more, rather than what it might have been before, where it was trying to play a noise or play a story, so to speak. So I think that's veering into the next set of the question, which we'll go down to in terms of the good examples. But I think driving that accountability down to what is that is, for me, quite simple at the time, is what is the risk and what we're going to do about it, regardless of cost, time, etc. Sorry, I just come up with something.
I've got another observation which obviously complicates this whole area, and that is, I'm pretty sure we've all experienced it, especially big projects where the risk manager or the risk expert is sort of trying to be independent, and you've got the client on one side and the supplier, the organization doing the actual work on the other side, and they're trying to put together a combined risk register. And you've got the massive issue of what goes in and what goes out, because at the end of the day, if the risk register and what comes out of it is an input into the cost estimate, there are a whole level of dynamics that they're now added in terms of the client will try and keep the cost estimate down, and you've got the supplier side who will try and get the cost estimate up, and they'll try and bang in every single risk under the sun to get that inflated risk contingency. So that is another challenge as a risk manager that I've faced, trying to go through all of that and trying to make sense of it and come up with a legit risk register that is actually as quantifiable as possible and is agreed by both sides. There is that tension.
No, exactly that. And again, it comes down to the vehicle or the purpose of risk. And obviously some people unfortunately see it as a tick box. Some people see it as a management tool and as their life and soul. Some people, as you alluded to, then see it as an opportunity to go after money or have protection, etc. Now, there's a fine line between the management tool and having those allowances, but it's the manner, and that's in a higher level. That's coming back to some of the points that people made around leadership and setting that tone, as well as then if we're talking, I'm trying not to go full project program space here, but if we're talking project program space, it's also driven by the type of contract, and that's often taken out the hands of the risk professionals, where it's set the landscape for how those engagements are going to be. Now, again, you can still come at it from the management tool. What are we doing about it? What can we manage? Let's not worry about weather, for example, because we can't manage the weather in that simple term, but it's getting that engagement. Then the money part or the schedule part, etc., to be managed on the side. Richard.
Yeah, I was wondering whether it's almost like a question, because I'm wondering whether other people have this experience too. And one is, I work in systemic risk, I work across complexity, and I know we all do really, but it's my business, if you like, and I've been studying it for 20 years. So what I find is that when I say to people, actually, you've got to let go of the idea that a risk is something that might or might not happen. And if it does happen, it has this range of possible consequences. That's their risks. Cool. But something like, for example, a project being understaffed, or you need a particular skill in a project team and you haven't got it. To me, that's a source of risk. And I put that in my risk register, and I encompass it in the conversation around uncertainty, because it creates uncertainty for the outcomes of the project and certainly threatens success of the purpose. My question really is, do other people experience what I do quite often, which is where lots of leaders will say, no, that's a management issue, not a risk. That doesn't belong in the risk register. You can't talk about those things because they're issues. And therefore go away and come back with a risk register that's only got risks in it, which what they mean by that is things that might or might not happen. And if they do happen, they have possible consequences, as opposed to things that are already there, but are sources of risk, like a project being understaffed or something like that. Is that an experience people have as well, or is it just me?
All the time, Richard, all the time. And then there's a confusion between what is a program level risk and what is a project level risk, which is what I think where you're getting at is, these are all sources of uncertainty. In effect, they are program level risks. An organization will have a whole raft of program level risks around resources, inflation, COVID, meteorite striking the earth, whatever. And I mean, I'm getting a bit flippant here, but I think you know where I'm getting at. And they say, oh, we'll handle it. Don't worry, projects. You have your own little set of risks that you can manage. And then they realize they can't handle it, and they'll say, can you please duplicate these sources of uncertainty into your risk register at the project level? And by then it's too late.
Yeah, but yeah, also building on that, I think what Richard was also getting at is just around where there's those uncertainties. They know it's going to happen. I think, but they don't actually tackle those. Well, as you've said there, around understaffing, etc. They know it's going to happen, but they don't know the magnitude or the range that it's going to happen. But they don't want it in the risk register because they prefer the yes or no. They prefer the yes or no question in the risk register. Now that's where, again, come back to definition of risk is around sources of risk, uncertainty, etc. There's still that. There's varying practices. I think that's why we're here, is to start testing that as well.
Yeah, I have to add though that if you, in my world, I don't use this, and I'm not trying to be critical of any standard or whatever, but I don't use the standard definitions of risk from ISO 31000 or COSO or whatever else, precisely because although they're well intentioned, and if they're used really wisely and with great thought, that they're perfectly fine. But most often they're, risks are an impact of uncertainty on objectives, and we get very focused on objectives as opposed to purpose and the why we're going, and all kinds of things happen. So I think we, in a sense, we're talking about risk leadership here, right? And inherent in that is we know what we mean by the idea of risk, right? Yeah. And so if I prefer the notion that a risk or a risk situation is any situation that creates uncertain implications for future success to purpose and task. So the why you're doing it, and also what you're trying to do. So the project deliverables, but also why the hell does the project exist? What's it there to do in the sense as part of the program or the portfolio or whatever it is. So it's actually an interesting question to ask, what do we mean by risk? And when we go to the positive and the negative side, which people have raised, and I agree entirely, I've always said that the world takes the word risk as a pejorative. We know they do. You yell out risk, they don't think what's the opportunity. Yep. They think where's who's going to hit me with something or whatever. And so to get rid of that, rather than trying to tell people they got to think of risks as positive and negative, because they just can't, just doesn't happen culturally, just doesn't happen. You've got to actually change the way in which we use the idea of risk, where risk is no longer just risks to objectives like like you might normally think, but rather risks to the maximization of the purpose. And when you, if you're going to maximize purpose in an uncertain world, you've got to take opportunities.
Absolutely.
You can't act in a world that's changing. You've got to change. And if you don't do that, you will have suboptimal success at best, if not failure. So we get around the problem of positive and negative risk by saying risk is always negative in the sense, because that's what the word means. But we're talking about anything that might stop you maximizing your success to your purpose. So it's quite a complex thing, isn't it? And risk leadership depends on how we define risk.
No, absolutely, and kind of as a segue into the second part of this question, because otherwise I don't want to cut your break, so people can get a refreshment break. But it's around, the next one's around, please identify examples of methods used to overcome the barriers. And just leading on that, Richard, at a previous organisation, Ørsted, who are an offshore wind, or they are now an offshore wind, they used to be an oil and gas organisation. They talked around articulating the benefits of proactive decision making. So they took the mentality that they've identified risks, they've identified mitigations, but by taking the mentality to enact those mitigations as early as possible, it would enable acceleration, or at least enable moving at a pace and not being slowed down. And it potentially could reduce resource workload pressures, because you would tackle it as early as possible before it became a bigger problem. Now that approach worked in a sense, but it was coming at risk, but in a positive manner. Let's get up and do something about it, rather than, right, we've captured a risk, let's just leave them for 6 months and come back and see what's happened. So I just wanted to add that example just because it was tying in. So the other examples that we've talked around that may cover some of the raft of points that we've now added at the top, which is really encouraging, is messaging to SLT is key. So removing the risk modelling speak and honing in on the key aspects. We've talked a little bit around that already. There's use a structured framework to identify risky stakeholders and manage accordingly. And David's conveniently or kindly added in a link to one of his slides or one of his content, which is more around, not just around the power and the influence mindset. There's also other elements to add that we can touch on if we need to. There's upfront facilitated workshops with senior managers and the risk team to agree what good looks like. Simplify risk tools to minimize completion time. Prompt business to think broader than delivery risks. What are the impacts on the broader business of delivering the change? Introduction of risk management committees, exec engagement. That's a key point, I think, because often risk is quite low on the agenda in some management meetings. Be upfront with the SLT with the impact of the business. Set up a cross-functional risk steering committee, so kind of similar to that one. And then avoid setting up separate risk meetings, which can be seen as a time drain. Integrate risk thinking into the cadence of existing, it says project governance, but that can be project and organizational governance. So those are some of the key examples that you guys, or you've added in pre-workshop. Is there anything, and also feel free to jump back into the mural and add any more examples. Is there any key examples there that, based on what we've talked around for the first, 40 minutes or so, any key examples as to how we tackle these barriers and challenges on stakeholders that people want to raise? Deborah, thank you. I was hoping someone would raise their hand.
Yeah. So just taking back to the bit that I raised before, which is creating a thing of orphaned risks.
Yep.
We find that sometimes somebody who's been in an organisation or seen something for a while can identify and flag a risk, but it may not be theirs to carry forward. And then what happens is it falls down the cracks because there isn't anybody to carry it forward, or it could be complex, it could be across a number of different areas. So at that point, created this thing, just called it an orphan risk, because it just needs to be adopted by somebody.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the right place to do it. And also making people, when I talked about language before, using the language in a way so that it's not aggressive in some way. So I don't have a risk manager, I have a responsible manager. And we have an accountable executive who will oversee things or whatever. So it's just moving that language around so that people don't feel it's kind of getting to the psyche a little bit, so that they feel like, once again, it's that superhero cape. I'm facilitating it, I'm moving it, and I am sitting in front of it and I'm being a leader, but do you know what? I'm being a leader with some support structure under me.
Good.
And that tends to get things moving a little bit. But it's been part of the barrier by saying you are a risk manager, and they go, I'm not a risk manager, I'm an ex-manager, and they'll give you a job title.
No, exactly that. And I within my organisation, I shy away from the job title risk manager for the connotations that it brings. Yeah, not one for today, but I think that's just it's that perception piece, isn't it? Is that if we boil it down to, are we managing risks? Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. It's that facilitation, it's that leading, it's that coercing, and challenging is the key. Now that doesn't sit under a management or a manager.
Yes, you may have quite a broad risk in a program which is quite complex, and it will have elements of health and safety in it, and elements of little bits of people pieces and things like that, and bits of finance. And you, in the end, it's the health and safety managers who lead it, but they'll go, but I don't know anything about finance. I don't think we want them to facilitate and work with each other. So it's that complexity that I find gets in the way of stakeholder engagement, because sometimes they just feel that they're not equipped to do it, and it's how we present it to them enables them to feel that they are equipped to do it. And by putting the right framework around it and educating the leaders above them as to what the framework looks like, they themselves don't feel attacked when they're trying to manage it. They feel supported by those leaders.
Absolutely. Great.
So that's the direction of movement.
Ian,
It always works, but it works a lot of the time.
No, exactly. If it worked all the time, we'd all be a lot easier, wouldn't it?
We wouldn't be keep trying to make it better if it worked.
Exactly that. There would be no need for risk if it was better. And also,
trying to sell risk management to people, that it's something there to enable, rather than to get in their way, is always a good one. I'll come away because I can see Ian's got his hand up.
No, it's all right. Thank you very much, Deborah. Ian, you got your hand up.
Thank you. I was looking at the post-it around the avoid setting up separate risk meetings, which can seem as a time drain. So as you know, I work as an independent consultant. So sometimes when you come in, you look at the landscape, there isn't already, those sorts of meetings in place. People are reluctant to dedicate all to their time. So, alternative options to sort of latch on to the back of meetings where you'll know everybody's attending. So, whether that be getting a 10-15 minute slot at the back of a managed meeting or something like that, where you'll get all the audience in the same place at the same time. I feel sometimes in regards to stakeholder engagement, it's about your credibility. What people don't want to do is to look at risks they already know about. So if there's an opportunity to try and come up with something, or try and find some insightful information which you can bring to a meeting, sometimes people start getting a bit bought into what you do and what you know, and you might be able to start pushing the risk management maturity forward a bit.
No, it's a good point. It's something, personally, I try to drive a what's coming discussion in meetings rather than what have we done, and that ultimately drives I find the leaders obviously don't have time to know the full ins and outs of the risk register, never will, I don't think. But by tying it into what's coming, key milestones, key activities, key decision points, and then the challenges or hurdles that they may face to achieve those activities, milestones, whatever, you suddenly get a little bit more of a buy-in from them, because they see that forward look and they go, actually, we need to either make a decision, we need to support you, or we need to give you more resources, etc., etc. And it's by presenting it in that, and I often just do it on a one slide per set, so it's dead easy for them to understand it, and you get that buy-in because they're living and breathing everything around how it's moving, why they're an organisation or a project, but they're not in that detail. You present it in that manner, you suddenly get that challenge or buy-in or action. I think that's the key, as well as often what you've mentioned there is you should not be presenting tick box what they've seen for the last 6 months with no change. It should be looking for an action, looking for a reaction as well with stakeholders. Sometimes fine. Richard.
Yeah, oops, there we go. There's the thing. I'm just trying to, well, actually, I just got my bloody point now. Sorry. Open floor again. I'll come back to you when I get my head together.
No,
It must be late at night. It must be
it
late at
must be
night.
late at night. I would say have a coffee.
Yeah.
Don't have a coffee.
Yeah. I think I need a stronger coffee.
Yeah, not at 10 o'clock at night, mate.
Oh yeah, I have remembered finally.
Sure.
A lot of people have mentioned decision making, and I think we would say I would say that we don't do risk management for the sake of risk management. We do it so we can make great decisions. We do it so we do that kind of work so decision makers can understand the uncertainties as part of the story of what they're trying to decide about and what they need to decide about. Like they may not think a decision is necessary until they understand that there's some uncertainties, or they may have to make a decision regardless, and they want to understand the uncertainties that are related to it. But we use a decision checklist, and it's not a check. It's a decision readiness checklist, and it's a very short checklist. It's on one page, and it's only got I think it's 4 quadrants and about 2 or 3 things in each quadrant, and it asks the questions like, do we understand who the stakeholders are for this, and so on. But it goes into the uncertainty space as well. So it asks questions around: are we ready to make a decision? Have we done the work? And it's not just about uncertainty, but it includes it. And it includes: do we understand things that do we understand where our gaps in knowledge are? That things we don't even know about. And by making it about decision making, including decision risk and uncertainty in the picture, but not only being in that, we find we get really good engagement from leaders, because they're seeing it as a whole thing, and that the risk story or the uncertainty bit is part of a larger story, that all of which is important to them.
No, exactly that. And I've been challenged for, I guess, 10 years plus as to the so what question. So what you tell me about it, and as you tie that into the crux around decision making, it only helps that engagement, where they start to see that it actually either is informing them in a positive way, or actually calling out potential challenges that they need to be mindful of before they make that decision. Good, thank you, Richard. Anyone else on some of the examples? We've had some additions. I've lost track because sorry.
Just very quickly, Graham, going back to that one about avoid setting up separate risk meetings. Sometimes you can't avoid doing that. You have to have separate risk meetings because the existing meetings, and ideally, I always try and have a slot in the existing project progress meetings and stuff like that to talk about risk, even if it's for 10-15 minutes. But sometimes you just haven't got the time or to do that, and you've got to have a separate risk workshop or risk review meeting to go through a risk, analyzing, assessing risks in a manageable way. But going back to that whole issue about trying to join existing meetings, it's also very important where on the agenda risk and opportunity, or threats and opportunities is. Invariably, if you end up being at the bottom of the agenda, time's gone, and by the time you get to my bit, the meeting's nearly over because the time's run out. People have to go to other meetings. So it's critical to have that agenda item, if you do have it in an existing meeting, right at the top end, preferably straight after the safety bulletin, have risks as the next item. Otherwise, if you're stuck at the bottom end, you've had it.
No, exactly. And the minds, I've seen it work a number of times, where if you get the buy-in from an SLT, or at least, let's say, a delivery director or something, if you set off on a meeting and you talk around your key risks, ultimately that should then be talking through the topics that need to be discussed in the meeting. So a litmus test is always if risk is at the bottom of the agenda and everyone's gone through and talked around what they did last month or what they're worried about, etc., and you get to the risk section and it's not aligned, that's where there's a disconnect in the process culture. You put if you've got it honed in and you've got the buy-in, etc., you put risk at the top, it then covers off a lot of the stuff in meetings that they don't really need to do, coming back to Ian's point, because they either know it or it's rear view mirror type stuff, if you know what I mean. So, I annoy organisations and project teams around where risk is on an agenda, because I always think it has to be as close to that safety element. It's never going to replace that, but it has to be near the top of the agenda if they're truly serious about it. But
That's correct.
the benefit of where you put it in that discussion is that everything should tail off it, as in what are we doing about it? Have we got the finance? Have we got it in the plan? Have we got it? Is everyone aligned to what we're supposed to do? It comes at the back end and it's a tick box, and there's no value in it at all.
Yeah, that's right.
Conscious of time, I just want to quickly talk on, I'll pick on this one. So using the MI system to highlight where there are good practices and not so good to stakeholders to drive better management of risk. Anyone want to own up to putting that on there and what they want to talk around?
Yeah, myself, Peter Burns. Yeah, so I just found over the years that when you use lots of Excel spreadsheets or Word documents and all those highly detailed information sources, it just doesn't seem to work. But when you have a management information system and you're able to highlight and do some really useful analysis about the quality of the management of risks, I think that does tend to sort of highlight the pockets in an organization where good practices aren't necessarily followed. And you'll probably find also it's the same areas across the whole organization, and there's other parts of the organization, such as people doing quality assurance or internal audit or performance management, and it just helps to galvanize a more organizational wide approach to address shortfalls.
Absolutely, and again, it comes back to it's not one size fits all as well, but it highlights and at the same time the benefit we see, or I see, around the MI or integrated data, however we want to call it, is it gives you points to hone in on and hone for whatever reason seems to be my word of the day. But it's not only highlights good practice, and then may also highlight where someone may need support or whatnot. Is the key is, again, it's around that. It's not coming back to Kevin's original point. I think it was Kevin. Apologies if I forgot the name wrong. It's around not trying to portion blame, but also highlight, promote good behaviour, but then also if there's struggling parts, is how can we support it? Not point fingers and just leave them to it. It's how you can support it and get around them. And then at the same time, that then may also call into, actually, I don't need to have my risk discussed on a monthly basis. Come back to me every 3 months or leave me to it, that sort of thing. It just helps drive that. And again, it's like this post-it note here. It helps drive that and some sort of insightful information to then have that right conversation.
One element of this management information systems, and I'm sure you all experienced this, is the dreaded, or should we say our friend, the risk register. It's surprising how many organizations still use Excel to manage or hold their risks. And I'm finding that can be a turn-off, an extreme turn-off, where you have an Excel risk register that is about 50 columns long with everything in the kitchen sink in there. And when project teams look at that and thinking, I'm going to use that to assess every single one of my risks, you must be having a laugh.
Absolutely.
So it's critical. It's critical, this is balance between having an Excel document to capture risks and a decent risk database management system, whether it's like ARM or Predict or Exactium or whatever, to manage your group of threats.
Yeah, and coming back, or maybe coming even up a level, is picking on David's point that he gave before the workshop.
Yes.
Is around understanding you've ultimately understanding what your stakeholders need and want to see. So we've all been there where commercial and finance are only ever interested in the numbers. We've seen delivery or other elements that want to understand the scope and the schedule and how we're getting there. And the key is around, as you've mentioned afterwards, is taking out the detail. You largely need the detail to run the process and get confident that you've thought of what you need to think about, but at the same time is then how you engage with stakeholders shouldn't just be using that vehicle or that tool. It should be, what do they need to see, what are they interested in seeing, and where can they even influence and support you? Because again, that comes back to what we were talking around, those separate meetings or even just the decision point is ultimately we should be putting stuff in front of stakeholders for them to make a decision or support or whatnot. A risk register ultimately turns people off because it's like, what's it tell me? I don't know what the story is here.
That's right.
And it's how you elevate the data.
Yeah.
There's a couple of points in the chat. Deborah's points about bring chocolate biscuits at start meetings help, definitely. There's risk heat maps, agree, Kevin, and Ratty, high level one risk register is one way of engaging. Craig, you've come off mute and stuck your hand up. Oh, you jumped off.
Apologies. No. I think it goes back to a lot that's been discussed there. It's one of the things I found was keeping the touch points and engagement simple and not overcomplicate it. Because you can turn people right off by going into the nth degree on QSRA and what distribution you're using and correlation, but in reality, they don't care. They just what information do I need to give you and what does this mean overall? Similar to integrating outputs, so it's all one message. So we've talked about the kind of group project meetings or whatever they are, where schedule saying one thing, commercial saying another, and risk is saying something completely different. Getting that integrated in the one message, so we all talk to each other, just makes it all a lot more simple when it can happen. And one of the kind of goes back to the kind of keeping it simple is one of my bugbears is when you go into projects or a major program where there's like 500 odd risks in the register, of which every single one's got at least one mitigation action, but in reality nobody's managing any risk. It's actually sometimes better to just have not populate every field in the risk register you can have, except that you're not going to manage every single risk and just focus your attention on the right stuff. You've got a better chance of actually managing 5 risks than you would 500.
Absolutely, and that comes back to so I talk around manageability and proximity as well. Is what can we truly manage, and let's focus the attention on what's here and now. Let's not manage a risk that's 5 years down the line unless we have to. But where's our attention going to be? Give us the most benefit. And just picking up on your point, the integration piece is key in this, and the MI system is where you, if you're able to integrate risk, schedule, cost, benefits data, scope data, etc., and present that as a one output or decision point, it adds so much more richness rather than, as you said, you go to the risk page, you go to the commercial page, you go to whatever, and it doesn't align. That's where the credibility loses straight away, and it's typically pointed at risk because they believe the cost plan before they believe the risk register, unfortunately.
There's more subjectiveness to risk.
Sorry. Yep. Kevin, hands up. Just and then we'll break because I'm conscious I don't want to cut your break.
Yeah, that's fine. And I don't want to get in the way of people's tea and biscuits and all that stuff.
Exactly.
I think just one of the things that we've been talking about, so we're talking about barriers to stakeholder engagement, and we're talking about people either not wanting to engage or not feeling that they can engage, or potentially feeling that the kind of governance is clunky or some of the tools they don't understand. One of the ways I've seen it work in the past in terms of things to potentially get past some of this is putting risk management as part of people's objectives. And really making it a key driver of someone's performance and how their performance is measured and managed. I guess it won't get you past the barrier of tools maybe not being used or maybe tools not being understood, but I think at least gets you past that barrier of people not wanting to engage. And if you make it part of their role to say, look, this is part of your job to manage your risks or work with your risk colleagues to make sure your risks are managed, I think that can help drive that as well.
Absolutely. We've seen varied use or benefits around kind of risk champions that are driven out of kind of, as you said, that objective based personal development. It's a key area. It comes back to some of the points we talked around earlier, is that where people need to understand that risk isn't just the risk manager's role and understand that benefit. Ian, hand up. And then we.
Yeah, sorry to delay the coffee and biscuits. It was just two quick points. One of those is my background previous to working in risk was working in sort of resourcing and HR and so on, and that risk management to a certain level is a baseline competence of a project manager. So some of the work we're doing around the going back to the point of an admin task of managing a risk register, really is within the project management's remit. And, you know, we're really the subject matter experts to start developing the information they have and to provide those insights. So, you know, really there should be some support outside of your project or the initiative where HR are saying, you know, it's a prerequisite for becoming a project manager. And my other point was really around the Excel sheets. I'm currently working for an organisation who, albeit they use you know, probability and forecasting to predict certain information from a project management point of view or a risk management point of view, they were using an Excel spreadsheet. So they had rolled out a new piece of software which was an adapted version of another piece of software which still didn't work for risk management. But what I did do, because they had a large risk register of a number of risks, is I tied them all to their milestones and then just sent out a dashboard showing, here's your next milestone coming up. We've still got, you know, a number of risks which are sitting at management level, which still need to be addressed before, you know, so basically there's a risk to each of these milestones. And once the senior managers got on top of this, you know, they put out a task for everybody to start pushing on these.
No, it's again, it comes back to that integration of data and how you present it in a manner, for sure. Right, we're 5 minutes behind our break, but I'm still going to give you 10 minutes because I need 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 40 minutes past whatever the hour is, wherever you are, because I've lost track of the time zones that we're in today. And then, yeah, we are still aiming to finish the breakouts at 3:30 for then a catch up and then a kind of capture on. But we'll move on to this governance. So yes, let's stay in the breakout room. I'll go on mute, turn the camera on and then off, and then I'll come back at 22. Thank you all. not very nice blue, Kevin. Yeah. It's in my, you picked up a good point. It's always in my bag. It's a pen. Either in my hand or in my bag. Right. 22. Everyone back in the room? Or not? Someone needs me a second. Ian stuck the thumb up, so that's fine. Right. So I'll get going. Second half then is similar to, not similar, but it's building on the stakeholder engagement, and we purposely chose these two questions topics because they're inextricably, I can't speak, they're linked in effect. So the question for this second half of the breakout room is: the principles of good governance are essential to risk management in order to achieve effective decision making. How do risk leaders best leverage the interconnected relationships between governance, decision making, and risk management? So what we're looking for, and what some of the contributions we've had already, but again, feel free to be adding mural post notes as we go, as examples might include techniques used to allow independent insight to inform decision making without being influenced or biased. Establish what governance principles can be used by risk leaders to handle competing objectives and risk perspectives across projects, programs, organisations, contractor supply chain, and consider the minimum governance requirements to enable risk management to inform, support decision making. So again, we're kind of looking top half for the next, what would you say, about 25 minutes will be around high level, sort of the things we would look to leverage, I guess, governance, decision making, and risk management. And then not playing ball me is then the examples. Hold on, the board is playing. Is then the examples around the governance and decision making where it's potentially worked before that's helped enable that. I'll just reset the board because it's not showing me the full bottom. Right. Okay. In terms of that first one, then some of the key topics that we've covered pre-workshop, sorry, I've lost my train of thought, is around, so remove the technical language as we've talked around and ask leaders what worries them, remap to the taxonomy and bring it to life in their business and their results. Regular corrective action to bring projects back on course, explain to project board how achieved. Ultimately, that doesn't just need to be projects, it can be organisations. Making use of the audit and probity committee to support decision making, check and challenge thinking. Progressive assurance, open up risk reviews to all stakeholders, which can also drive increased confidence around the due process and the rigour that was followed. Integrate decision making with forward-looking schedules, as we've talked around, less of a tick box, more of a call for SLT buy-in. Using risk appetite as a tool to aid understanding of how ERMF links together and can, in some cases, encourage a business to take more risk, or at the least understand the risk their strategic decisions are carrying. Governance does not just mean committee time. Efficient governance should involve interaction with the relevant stakeholders at the right points in development. Relying on committees does not ensure the right level of engagement. And we are not just in the business of risk reduction, we are also there to help the business to take informed risk. That message needs reinforcing. Okay. Anything that anyone wants to start with on those topics? Any willing participants? Or a new topic, so to speak?
Just on that last post-it notes, Graham, about we're not just in the business of risk reduction, we're also here to help the business to take informed risk. I think that is critical. Just because it's a risk doesn't mean we've got to stop it come hell or high water.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as we know, there are various strategies, anything from tolerate it to mitigate it to transfer it. And it's not all about mitigation and to avoid it, because some things you just cannot avoid. You just cross your fingers, it doesn't happen. But should it happen, you have the appropriate response to manage should that happen. obviously a good example in hindsight is COVID, which or some of us in the risk management business will say that's not a surprise. I mean, I was talking about pandemics 20, 25 years ago in the lead up to 2000, but no one ever took any notice of it because they said, oh, it will never happen. So those who say COVID and pandemic is a total black swan, that's a load of nonsense. But leaving that to one side, there are things which you're not going to be able to mitigate, but be ready to manage it should it occur.
Yeah.
So that's an important message.
Yeah, and I think that that's a key point to maybe build on, is around, I think when it comes to decision making, it's often around flexibility and agility to respond to decisions, rather than you map out all your risks, and that's people accepting that that's your landscape. Often the things that happen or occur are not the red, in simple terms, not the red risks, is that we've either not focused on where we need to be focused on, or something emerges significantly, and how we respond to it is key. And I think that's around that message, is around, it's more around that agility, flexibility to respond and adapt.
Yeah, that's right. And I think another point which a lot of non-risk people, or maybe even risk people, get confused over, I hope not, but a lot of non-risk people, is what are we as risk managers providing to our stakeholders, our clients, senior managers? It is basically a set of information, management information, from which they need to make a decision. And the danger is that the tail is wagging the dog. I mean, they've got to make a decision. And what we shouldn't be doing is, as risk managers, is saying it's our advice, take or leave it. It's just another piece of information that they got to take in the broad and use to make a decision about what's best for that project or for that organization.
Absolutely.
We don't have the answers in that sense. We're just another bit of information. Remember, risk management and risk is about uncertainty.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it may not happen.
No, exactly.
It may not happen. And now, if you're going to spend millions on something that may not happen, you're not doing the right thing. And as risk managers, we need to educate them that what we're providing you isn't the final answer. It's just another view for you guys to take on board and decide. You get a finance view, you get a commercial view, you get the HR view. Here's the risk management view, and you've got all the information, and now you've got to decide which way to go.
Absolutely. It's something that I'll build on later on in the examples, but a piece of work we've done previously is looking through risk in a number of lenses. So it's not just a risk register, it's not just a risk analysis. There's what ifs, there's benchmarking, there's forecasting, etc., etc. You present that as an overall view to management. It gives them comfort that maybe they've thought of everything, but it also gives them quite a wide range as to where their appetite may be. Now, I'm not in the game for one single number, one date anymore. It's ranges and it's envelopes, all this sort of thing. Good. Kevin, sorry, you've been very patient with your hand up.
No, it was some really good points there. I think some of the other things that kind of trip us up on this kind of aspect is just having a clear purpose for our kind of governance bodies, and the amount of times we've been either sat in or tried to present to kind of governance committee, and they start going off on a complete tangent, from what they're actually there to do, and to actually either opine on or to make a decision on. So I think about having a clear purpose, and that is another kind of key thing. And also making sure that the committees or the kind of governance bodies stick with that purpose. And it's almost like you need to have someone in the room who applies some guardrails, so that when they start going off topic, you say, let's kind of move back onto what this committee is about. Because let's kind of be honest, in a lot of these committees, you get a lot of the senior leadership team there who sit on other committees, and that's great so that they can have a kind of broader view.
Yep.
But they also need to be aware that when they're sitting in different committees, they should be wearing different hats. So yes, if you're a senior leadership member, you will be expected to have some kind of expert knowledge on a number of different areas, whether that's people, whether that's risk, whether that's commercial operations, you know, multiple different ways of kind of looking at it. But it kind of comes back to that, you know, this is what you're here to talk about. This is the hat you should be wearing when you're sitting on this committee.
Yeah.
And these are the types of decisions that this committee should be making. So try to kind of block out the kind of voices in your head from other things that you're aware of, because that's not what we're here to talk about.
No, absolutely, and you can come at this in a number. I've seen it happen both angles, where one, there's clear purpose set out why we start a decision making or a governance meeting as to what we're here to do and what we're going to discuss, and that's it. Also, it helps having sponsorship in the room. So typically a CFO or someone like that will be your advocate in that room. That helps move it along. The flip side I've also seen is where potentially there's not enough, or there is no decision maker in the room. And again, it comes back to that terms of reference, where who's enabled to make a decision, or then who's ultimately signing this off, whether it is CEO, CFO, head of risk, head of commercial, head of whatever. Sometimes I've seen instances where you've been in a meeting room and there's been no action because no one's willing to take that responsibility. So again, it's not purely, again, this is where coming back to the definition point that David was talking about in the main room, is it doesn't purely come down to risk. This is where there's an influencing part or a challenging of the bigger picture, as well as to how we all fit in. Richard.
There we are, unmute. Yeah, I think one of the key things here is, a moment ago it was mentioned that you know, the purpose of committees, or the purpose of a particular group, or whatever decision making, whatever's happening. But I want to take purpose from a slightly different angle and say, what if you have a committee where it's a steering committee, let's just say a steering committee that needs to make some decisions. What if you have a committee where the individuals on the committee, they all wear different hats, they're bringing different perspectives, but they don't have a shared purpose that they're all trying together to get to. And so what I'm suggesting here is that when you're talking about governance, risk, and how to bring those things together, one of the things you really got to know is that in a committee or a decision-making body, or where there's a body advising a decision maker, that there is an agreed shared purpose that they're all trying to achieve, even though they're bringing different perspectives, and that their prime job is together to get to that best possible decision, best possible whatever, not just to fight their little silo or fight their particular technical point of view. So that's one thing. And the other thing I think about again, in steering committees or governing bodies is, if you have a governing body where a lot of good information, let's say business cases, you know, project reports for decisions and so on, are being fed up or to the committee, that's cool. And let's assume it's done really well. It doesn't alter the reality that if that committee is made up of the right sort of people, the right sort of stakeholders, they have unique perspectives, and they have some work to do. It's not just we're being told these are the 6 main risks, therefore we'll make some decisions. The committee has to actually say, this is what we're being told. Now, what do we think the risks are? And what shape do they have? And what are we seeing that other people aren't seeing? What's our perspective? So in other words, there's some risk work to be done as part of decision making at every level. So whether it's a steering committee or whether it's some other level, at every level of management, there is risk work to be done to add to the quality and the thinking that's coming up from below or wherever it's coming from. And if you don't get those two things happening, that is a shared purpose. If you've got a committee or you've got a group, and if you haven't got the idea that every level of management, including steering committees, have work to do to actually do their own unique thinking and bring that to the story, then what you'll get is partial decisions all the time.
Absolutely, that's bang on in terms of, yeah, for me, often challenges have been around that shared purpose, and then and ultimately making a decision for the greater good. Often, as we will know, is there's egos or there's hidden agendas, etc. in these committees. you will only get the right decision if they're all pulling in the right direction. And yeah, ultimately risk does come down to perception and perspectives, and it's to be mindful that everyone, even everyone on this call, will view risk in a slightly different manner to the next person, and we've got to be mindful of that. And when we're going into committee, because it's not, it cannot land the one way, if that makes sense. So decision papers, action, whatever, and we've got to be mindful that other people will review it in a certain manner, and it's how you coerce them or give them that insight to make that right decision. Okay, anyone else? Anything else on this topic? Who's come off mute? Ian?
No, I'm interested to talk about remove the technical language and ask what worries them.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see who posted that and just their thoughts on, to dig a bit deeper into this.
Anyone volunteer to that? I posted something similar, but I can type, but I've talked enough about it.
Can I suggest that actually just a reframing of the question or of the idea, rather than saying removing technical language, which I think is a fine, I mean, that's a good thing to suggest. It's more about, can we speak in the language of the people we're speaking with and the stakeholders or the decision maker?
Yeah.
And whatever that language is, can we speak in terms of their needs? Can we speak in terms of what they are concerned about? Can we can think about what they're worried about? One of the things we do in our risk workshops, when we're doing what we call holistic risk workshops, they're very different than a standard risk workshop, but one of the things we do is we ask all the stakeholders in the room as part of the storytelling to tell us what's going on for them, right? What's important to them. And this is about, we're generally in a project risk workshop. We know it's a problem. That's what it's usually about. But we're not asking them what risks do they think, what risks are they seeing for the project. That we want to know that, of course, but we're not asking them that. We're saying what matters to you. And if they're distracted by something important that's got nothing to do with the project, but they're distracted by it, we want to hear about it.
Yeah.
And what you're trying to do is get into the thinking and the language of your stakeholders or your decision makers or whatever from their perspective.
Yep.
So it's, yes, get rid of the technical language or technical jargon, and I agree with that entirely. And yet, really, the point I think is to move into their language and their thinking.
Okay, good. Thank you, Richard. Deborah.
Hey, this always brings me back to a thing that happened to me many years ago as a project support officer, and sitting in a meeting with a group of project managers and a group of electricians and technical people, and they sat there for about an hour having conversations. I'm taking notes. They went out for 20 minutes and came back to a big A3 thing stuck at the end of the table on a cabinet. And what I'd done was I'd taken the acronyms off one, the acronyms off the other. They were using the same acronyms meaning different things.
Yeah.
And in the same meeting, in the same organisation, they didn't know what each other was talking about.
Yep.
And they were getting cross with each other at times. So I'm very much on board with losing technical language, not just for us, but also for those who are around the table, demystifying it.
Yeah.
I'll use the word taxonomy, but when with people I'm working with, I'll say we have some risk categories. Yeah. We don't. It's just tuning it in so that people don't have to get the thesaurus out, they don't have to get the dictionary out, they can actually just continue the conversation as they go, and try and get them to also remove some of their technical language so they remove the barriers around them. So it's by taking it out of mine, hopefully I'm taking it out of theirs as well, and getting them to encourage that we get to understand each other. That's my view on removing the technical languages.
No, absolutely. And building on Richard's point, it's understanding what the stakeholder is interested in, but then also coming back to, I think Craig's point early doors was around the capability and capacity. So yeah. There's been a couple of roles I've been in Crossrail and HS2 where my role has not been the risk modeler or actively involved in the modelling, but my role has been the go-between between senior leaders and the data analytics piece, and to present it in a manner that they are not lost, but they get confidence and assurance that the due process is covered, etc. And that's where it comes down to is understanding audience, but then also understanding what they need to hear, and as well as giving them that assurance without, as soon as you, as Craig alluded to, as soon as you go into the modelling speak, you go into distributions, you go into what you've done, you just see that light bulb go off, and you just see the eyes close over.
But even standard terminology such as you'll say, things like I've done it myself when I've been doing lots of work, and I'm living in my own little world, and I'll be talking about inherent risk, residual risk, and the taxonomy and all the rest of it, and I look up and I see this glaze across somebody's face, and I think I've done it again. So I have to talk about the untreated risk, the risk when we've actually got the controls in place, when we've got the and taking the language out so that they can just move through their own head out.
Yeah.
So just use the technical language and just make it available, but keep it for ourselves so that we know what we're dealing with. Same as an electrician would. They wouldn't tell you about all the bits and bobs. They just go, the green thing needs to go where the green thing goes, and the brown thing needs to go where the brown thing goes. They're not going to tell you all about the AC.
Depends if they're trying to overcharge you or not, Deborah. That's where the tax.
Yeah, when they're trying to confuse.
Technical speak, an extra £100.
Yeah, when they're trying to confuse you, yeah, we just basically try not to confuse them and be
exactly. But that's it. That's it. Good points. Anything else on this one before I try and move down to the bottom part, which is more the examples.
Just one point from me, Graham, which was why I asked the question, because I totally agree. There is a part of me that sometimes thinks, we train all this time to be risk management professionals, and we educate ourselves, and we have this sort of subject matter expertise, and sometimes I feel we go into roles and we're only using 10 to 15% of the sort of knowledge we have, and some of our insights we can provide with some of our more technical tools are valuable. And I suppose whilst we are trying to simplify things to get things across, I do sometimes feel that there should be a bit of a responsibility to people to get closer to our level, to agree, to understand what insights we can provide. An example would be, Afroz, Craig, you and I, we worked at Network Rail, where actually some of the analysis we provide is valuable, but people are like, oh, you're going to chuck some of these models into a machine and it's going to tell us that our project's going to be 3 years late. I'm not listening to that. We're actually, if you put the right information in, it will give you some valuable insights. So that's all I was really.
No, absolutely that, and I think that's the fine line, is that ultimately, and I think it going back to one of the early points was around, I think it was Ratty that was talking around data, and there's an element that a lot of our work is based on the robustness of data, or lack of, or whatnot, and what we've got to present is that robustness, whether it's through data, whether it's by tools and techniques, etc. But I think what you've alluded to quite rightly, Ian, is that I'm fed up hearing the black box, or you go off and do the sausage machine, etc. This sort of thing, where there's an underappreciation of what is actually the elements of what we do to then provide that assurance or that output. And I think, yeah, there is definitely a piece. It's a fine line, because again, you can easily go into the jargon and turn people off as soon as you go into that level of detail, but there is still a need for them to be educated in a sense that they understand the overall process and how we come to our end result.
Yeah, especially as we know, it's now even in football, those football fans with the XPs and expected goals and all that sort of information is done in the same way. People are quite happy to listen. You've lost
me already, mate. You lost me already. Football is just about what's in the top left corner, 1-0 or 2-0 or whatnot. That's all that matters. There's too much data. But that's a prime example of it, though. Yeah. Too much data, and it confuses or muddies the water, so to speak. So flipping that around to risk, that's the exact same.
I mean, Ian, you make some valid points there about our clients moving towards our level, not necessarily at our level, whatever that level is. And I don't claim to be one of these hyper expert risk managers who can number crunch, create these massive spreadsheets and pretend it's doing a QSRA or QCRA. But you're right, to a degree, we want our client to sort of move towards our level and have some sort of balance, some sort of meeting point. It'd be interesting. I mean, you talked about Network Rail and when we work together. I'm back at Network Rail as of last week, after a 5-year hiatus. So in many ways, I'm now having to refamiliarize myself with Network Rails and QCRAs, which previously in other clients they weren't emphasizing it as much. So there is a bit of a learning exercise for us risk managers now, when we go to clients, where some clients are very much, experts in risk management, and others where they're not. And it's trying to get that balance right.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Good, right. Conscious of time because we're still aiming for a 3:30 back in the main room piece. So we've covered off some significant elements around governance and decision making, and now it's more around talk through the good examples of risk leadership, where you have used good governance to successfully inform risk-based decisions. Apologies, I'm a little bit clunky here. For whatever reason, Mural's not giving me the full picture, but hopefully you can all see that now. So some of the examples, we had 2012 Athletes Village monthly correction to 100% confidence of beating scheduled targets with exploration of actions taken to project board. There's the element within the NHS, but then also I'm sure other industries have adapted the risk management bow tie to become a working document, helps to describe the risk, weaknesses, assign actions to consistently and accurately measure the risk month on month. We've seen that used as an element, both as a kind of maturity assessment as well as to where organisations may be strong in terms of certain areas they may manage risk, and then also coming back to that kind of MI piece as where some areas are not managing the risk, so to speak. There's develop a risk framework to include inherent and residual risk, allowing us to allocate the appropriate risk response and track movement and risk over time. Progressive assurance. So again, the same example as I used earlier, but skimmed over. But it was around driving in gates where there was low confidence, low assurance. Open the process right up. It invited every man and their dog, or every person and their dog, into the reviews, which was challenging at the same time. But it then drove far greater challenge, engagement throughout the process. So then when you got to the end of what we were supposed to do, there was less of a retrospective challenge and having to go back and answer for yourself, because everyone had bought into the process and then understood it. Again, this comes back to the kind of decision making point, is knowing the level of engagement, the level of knowledge they need to know to make a decision. What we found there was it was actually quite easy at the end of it, because the great and the good had been involved, and while they didn't like the number, as you can probably imagine, and the range, they understood the process, and there'd been enough challenge throughout, rather than you present a report and it's cold to the decision makers, and then sometimes that's where they then make a decision based on what they don't know. And then second line risk reviews with conceptual ideas to consider cost benefit analysis, potential regulatory considerations and impact on risk profile, allows exec to acknowledge and accept the level of risk being taken. I'm just muting people just now just because of background noise, sorry. Anyone want to talk, hand up, in terms of an example around good governance, where you've used good governance to successfully inform risk-based decisions? Has there been any additional posting?
I put one on, Graham. It was probably more a kind of specific one in a kind of unique situation, but it was a project that wasn't going very well. It had its own demons, and basically there was a lot of players involved, and the only way to kind of get forward, and we were talking about earlier about common goals and much to kind of everyone bought in. What we kind of agreed was there was a kind of a representative from each of the disciplines and each of the players at play, and they between them had a delegated authority to make informed decisions based on risk elements and all that, which meant our governance, our risk forum, was only by exception. So it was like a half-hour session, it was presented, and then me as the risk person then made a call basically on what it was, hearing all sides of it, and it worked really, really well, to be honest with you. It kind of took out a lot of the bits, so you're only discussing what needs to be discussed, really. Everything that everyone's agreeing with, we're not wasting time or hours discussing with, it's there, and we're only focusing, and it helped move things on.
Yeah. Good. Any comments to Craig there while I cough? No, it's a good point, Craig. I think it comes back to having who can make a decision, but then it also comes back to cutting out the noise and getting to the point of what we need to discuss and make a decision on. I think often decision making can be held back because there's too much noise or too much things to consider. And ultimately then it kind of comes back to are people in the right place to be making that decision. Good. Kevin.
Yeah, I've seen a really good example. It was in a very special circumstance where there was a particularly complex migration exercise going on from kind of one large IT platform to another. And what we did was we set up a kind of special governance committee where we actually almost flipped the three lines of defence model on its head.
Yeah.
So we recognised within our business that the real kind of risk experts within the organisation sat within internal audit and sat within the second line. So I think kind of typical governance would see, you know, lots of first line risk management colleagues, you know, in the room making the decision because they're responsible for managing the risk, with potentially a kind of second line kind of colleague maybe as a guiding hand, and you know, third line probably wouldn't even be, you know, in the room at all. But we flipped it on its head, as I say.
Yeah.
To I guess so that we could make those proper informed decisions about, you know, understanding, well, what is the risk here, from people who have kind of, you know, been there, done that, and you know been qualified and, you know, studied on this topics for a long time. So we've done that before, which I've seen work really well. As I say, it was only a special kind of circumstance. It was only for a finite time, so it wasn't, you know, any governance committee that would continue to exist after the event. There's also another thing around, I think the point around developing that risk framework to include the inherent and residual risks.
Yeah.
So again, as we all know, we've all got a kind of finite amount of resource, and again we've done that very, very similar, where we've taken the inherent residual and then obviously set those targets as well, so that we focus our resource on the right risks and on the kind of top risks, you know, recognizing that we cannot control everything, and it wouldn't be, even if we could control everything, it wouldn't be cost effective to do that either.
Yeah.
So yeah, just kind of building on those points.
No, they're great. They're great. I think, yeah, that reverse thinking again plays to knowing what your stakeholders are interested in and have the experience on, and again it ties into the ability to make a decision, because if they're not familiar with what you're asking them to do, they're going to struggle to make a decision. Flipping it on their head and having the people that live and breathe it to be the first decision point is key, I think.
I think we kind of set up because we recognised quite early on, when I think as we were moving through this kind of project of going through this migration exercise, we knew that as we were getting closer to those big decisions that needed to be made, the first line risk management colleagues were getting less and less comfortable. Yep. and seem to be getting less and less committed to making decisions or kind of doing things. So it was kind of back to that point I made earlier about bringing in those guardrails.
Yeah.
So to begin with, we brought in the risk experts, or as we identified kind of risk experts, to kind of help guide those decisions. But then when it got to the crunch, we thought, well, actually, let's kind of just change it up, and let's not just kind of stick to a particular way of doing this because, you know, we've either always done it like that, or, you know, because some manual says that you know, it should be all first line people who kind of take decisions or who take accountability for decisions. So yeah, we changed that up because we could see a kind of shift in behaviour.
Yeah, good. Any other examples anyone wants to raise?
I think from my perspective, when I was at National Highways, working on the smart motorways, and it's good that we've got Mark Babers, who I'm assuming is on the other group.
He's in the other group, so slag away if you're going to.
Oh no! I mean, we were colleagues working in the same company in smart motorways, and one of the things that obviously the perennial issue is data quality.
Yeah.
You know, however much you have a nicely a nice risk register, the data in there, can you trust the data? Because obviously the issue is that rubbish in is rubbish out.
Yeah.
So whether you do QSRAs, QCRAs, you profile a risk over the lifetime of a project or the risks, and you do drawdown or burn down. What is it you're actually looking at? Can it be trusted, the data?
Yeah. Yeah.
And invariably, we know that there's a hell of a lot of noise in risk registers. When it comes to the qualitative and the quantitative assessment of risk, the probability, the min, most likely, maximum. Is it actually believable? And one of the things that was developed in National Highways when I was there was various models to look at the quality of the data.
Yeah.
Still tools with limitations. You developed a tool that looked at the quality of risk registers, and then developed a tool that looked at the maturity of the whole organization when it comes to risk management, looking at half a dozen areas, whether it is to do with culture, to do with resources, and processes, and governance, and coming up with a scoring mechanism that once you've done that, it comes up with a score, and that score gives you a confidence level as to the quality of the data within the register before you do a QCRA or QSRA, knowing you've done the analysis.
So I get the principles, Afros. Would that then influence? So would that then influence how you are perceiving ranges around that, similar to, I guess, a kind of confidence level that you'd apply in a cost estimate driven by the maturity?
Yes, I mean, that sort of gives you a sort of a feel, and that's all it is. I mean, the problem with risk management is however much some of the risk management gurus out there say it's a science. We know, well, I do, my own personal view is risk management isn't a science in the normal sense. It's got so many uncertainties, prejudices, people's opinions, that whatever you do, it's going to have human fallacies, problems within that. And as a result, whatever is the output, you've got to take it with a slight pinch of salt, because it is what it is. I think various tools can help you in terms of the level of confidence you want to give to that information before you do the QCRA or before you do the QSRA.
I guess where I was getting at was that actually, and rather than, what I tend to do is not play around with the inputs, regardless of their maturity. Is then the perception that you take at the back end, i.e., there's a number of elements around data quality and maturity, etc. That can we stand behind what this is saying? You probably say no. So you then take a wider range, or you then take a wider envelope to go, actually, there's a number of, say, commercial, legal, whatever consent elements that we haven't considered yet. We've got to be pessimistic here rather than cut our cloth too tight. I think it's all good stuff, because it helps, because that's what we've all probably been party to that, where there's been over ambitious organisations, projects, etc., in terms of the risk process, and therefore it's then driven different behaviours. Richard?
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you, Alphonse.
Yeah, I'm still here.
What is it? Is it now Friday where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. It's bloody Friday.
Happy Friday.
It's Friday here. I'm going to refer to an organisation I was working with, and it was the Department of Conservation in New Zealand. And it was a while back, and they're friends of mine, so I can talk about them. They're all tree huggers, right? They're Department of Conservation. They hug bloody trees like crazy, and they also hug each other because they're that kind of people, right? Because they care about conservation, they care about the world, they care about each other. Now, what the department had done over many years, it had got itself into a hug fest where every decision really had to be made by consensus. Because we all care about each other, and if we don't all agree, we'll keep talking about it until we all agree, right? We want to bring everybody on the journey. And what we and they were seeing in retrospect, they were making some bad decisions, risk-based decisions. They were doing things that actually caused bad conservation outcomes over time.
Yeah.
And they couldn't work out what the hell was going on. And from a governance perspective, a couple of good things happened. The first one was that they brought somebody in to help them. In this case, it was us. It could have been someone else, to actually have a systemic look at what's deep rooted here, because we've been trying for a long time to do this better. We're working very hard, but how come we're making poor decisions and getting risk outcomes we didn't expect, and damaging the very thing we're trying to protect? And we identified through that work that they were making consensus-based decisions all the time.
Yeah.
And it was giving them the lowest common denominator. It was giving them the what they could all agree, right? Which wasn't necessarily the best decision. It was just what they could all agree. And it slowed things down, it made things late, it blah, blah, and as you'd all expect. So the good news story is that having recognized that, they then went through quite an extensive exercise of realigning their culture to one where they were consultative and sharing, and they listened to everybody, and they wanted to get all the insights, but that there was a single point of accountability. Yeah. That a single leader had to be accountable for decisions, and they had to make the decision based on what you know, on the purpose and the whatever for the organization, and so they changed the shape of how they were thinking about decision making. And I have to say, it made a pretty, over the years, because this is now 5+ years ago, over the years, it's made quite a dramatic difference to the kinds of decisions they can take, how fast they can take them, and whether they take, you know, what are effectively risk-based decisions, because, you know, they have to be able to take decisions that some people won't agree with. It was quite an interesting story of and I think the governance aspect, one is that you look deeply into why it is we're held in a place that isn't working. And the second part is then to take the actions to put in place a better regime of decision making.
Yeah. No, very, very good points. And I think building, well, it's something we've got to be mindful of is around the drivers around decisions, as well as ultimately in a lot of, well, I'll say a flippant comment. The majority is driving it as cost, if we're honest with you. Cost seems to be a key driver in decisions. There's a lot more elements and drivers, more prominent ones that are coming around social value, sustainability, customers, etc., that we have to be mindful of. And I think it's something within our team, especially, we start to look at trying to step away from the risk based on cost and schedule, because ultimately there's hidden agendas, or there's different mindset around those decisions. It's around the end, comes back to benefits ultimately, is around what benefits are we trying to deliver for organizations, projects, etc. And there may be other drivers at play when they come to make decisions. Good. Any other comments on examples of risk leadership where you've used good governance to successfully inform risk-based decisions? The mural is open if people aren't wanting to stick their hand up or speak anymore.
Actually,
ideas come in the middle of the night for Richard when he goes to sleep.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to. I think that what you just said, Graham, reminded me of something I think is worth saying, and about risk leadership. And it may not be quite to this particular question, but I think it's pertinent, and that is, effective risk leaders are really, really aware of the perspectives they are taking, what's inside their head. They are aware of whether they're thinking long-term, short-term. They are aware of whether or not they're consulting widely, or whether they're working to some of their own biases, or whether they already had a preconceived notion. They're aware of that stuff.
Yeah.
And a poor risk leader won't be aware of that shit at all. They'll just be doing what they think they're doing, right?
Yeah.
But a good risk leadership requires leaders, decision makers, to be aware of their internal mechanisms. And a really good risk leader will not only be aware of it, but they'll share it with the stakeholders around them.
Yeah.
Because that will build trust. And it doesn't mean they're going to change their decision, but it means, you know, when they say, look, I'm going to base my decision may seem strange to some of you, but I'm thinking really long-term here. And I'm thinking because of, this is where I'm going. I know that doesn't satisfy some of you, but that's the decision I'm going to take. Yeah. That sort of dialogue, both internal to your own head, but also sharing it with others and making yourself vulnerable by doing that. So a good risk leader going to make risk-based decisions will sometimes make themselves vulnerable to others by being open, transparent, and honest and others can therefore challenge them. But actually, it builds huge trust and has a very high value to do so. Sorry, I just I thought of that as you were speaking, Graham.
No, it's a good point, and it's something I still think. I think we talked about it earlier, but it's around. There's an independency as well as around the sticking to sticking as you said, to perspectives, awareness, etc. But then not being and being open and honest that this is the way you're thinking, rather than being driven by others, is key. I think ultimately, Craig.
Yeah, no, it's a wee bit slightly off topic, but it's kind of similar to what Richard was saying there. I mean, it's not just being aware of like the risk position. There's too many risk managers, I think, just get buried in the Excel risk register and don't actually look out and see what's happening around about them. And they just make the decisions or make their viewpoint in that risk register and that whole thing only, without going and understanding the overall project environment, the stakeholders and all that. It's kind of straddles both elements, but I think that's one thing that's a problem. Particularly, you can see it with risk management fails. It's one of the key things. They don't know what else is happening.
Yeah. Good. Any other comments around the room?
Yeah, Ian here. I suppose I'd like to add to what Craig's saying. It was actually a conversation we had, Graham, when I first joined, and it was a conversation about just the general all-rounder skills you have to be a risk professional. You know, it's the only role where, if required, sometimes you have to have both the technical knowledge and strong stakeholder influencing skills, and it's quite tough. And I think we have a lot of people in different roles, or people with different skill sets in the same roles. So some of the challenge we've had from the left hand side have been about people not necessarily having the skills or confidence or personality to challenge the stakeholders, to challenge the senior members of staff. And sometimes that's where the sort of downfalls are. I mean, people don't always feel comfortable going into a management meeting where there's quite headstrong project leaders, project managers, and telling them that the information they've got is correct, because they can just be overrun. So I think it's just an immaturity of the industry that we've yet to be able to distinguish what's maybe a technical quant-based position, or whether it's a more softer stakeholder influencer type position, maybe a risk engineer and a risk consultant or something like that.
Absolutely, and it's something I think that we did talk around in those initial workshops. It's maybe something to follow on around the behaviours and the expectations. So there's 100% element around influence and collaboration. I call it constructive challenging, basically annoying people, but being able to ask that and challenge people in a manner that not as trying to trip people up, but it's getting people thinking outside of what they've always done, and again understanding those perceptions and perspectives. Okay. Anything else before we close the breakout and we go back to the main room? Conscious of we're 2 minutes from time, and I'm keen to not be overrunning on my first session. No? Well, thank you. I'll just say to the room, thank you all for the last 2 hours. It's flown by, hasn't it? It's fun when you have a good topic. We've had some really good insights. I'll recap it all, or I'll recap next steps, etc. when we go back into the main room. But yeah, thank you all for your input in the last 2 hours. It's been great. Thank you. See you back in the main room. I'm about to close the breakout rooms, which would then be back in the main room automatically. Hopefully, he says. If I can find it. Where is it? We're all stuck in this breakout room. In fact, there we go. Right. I'll broadcast the message to all closing breakout. Great. See you all in the main room in about a minute. Hopefully. Thank you. we're all back in the room, all back in the main room. Hopefully. Right, hopefully that was
I'm not sure whether we've lost some people, because I think some people probably left the meeting thinking they needed to leave to come back to here, Graham. So apologies, we probably didn't explain it properly to everybody.
No, it's all right. Yeah, it's fine. Don't worry. We've got 23. I think we had about 30. So we've lost 6 or 7 either through interest or by the breakout rooms, one of the two. Well, hopefully that was a good 2 hours for everyone. On paper, originally we thought 3 hours was going to be quite a lot. And then this morning when we were going through the agenda, we suddenly realised that 2 hours in the breakout could fly through some of the topics that we talked about. In terms of summary then, I'll just do, hold on, I will get back to the slide deck. And I will go back to this one. I will drop the Survey Monkey. We can start the Survey Monkey just now. I'll drop this into everyone's chat. So while I'm talking, as a summary, feel free to open the Survey Monkey. And there's only 3 questions. One around how today's been, kind of key takeaways, and then 2, what should we be talking about going forward, as I said. So we touched on some of that at the back end of our conversation there, because ultimately this is the format, a similar format. It might be a bit more efficient next time round, but we're keen to harness conversation and get common understanding. So in terms of brief summary from our working breakout room, and Val jump in at I'll pause at the end of each question. So for the stakeholder engagement, the challenges, barriers, stuff around cultural understanding, interconnectivity between departments and teams. Our risk culture starts from the top. Capability and capacity to engage. Now that's not only in the risk profession, but also the other no worries, Deborah. Thank you for your input. Sorry. And then leadership fear, being overloaded, understanding perception of risk. So risk that obviously isn't just threats, it's around sources of risk, uncertainties, opportunities. What else? We start to then talk around the tailored risk engagements to engage stakeholders, which ultimately then led in a little bit to the decision making. Ultimately then looking at agendas, where does risk stand within stakeholders' thinking, as well as meetings, etc. We then also talked around personal development, is how do we grow, again, how, coming back to the very first point of David around risk leadership and risk management, is how do we engage other parts of businesses, teams, etc., so they are thinking about risk, and do we put risk management on PDPs, etc., or development plans? Do we, in some cases, what we've done before is around risk training is not around purely directed at risk professionals, it's around the interacting teams. And then we touched a little bit on tools and techniques, and how you engage stakeholders through what you present and the tools and techniques you use. That's a quick summary. We will obviously share our mural board afterwards. Val, anything else that was missing from you?
Yeah, I think things, we had quite a lot of conversation about ensuring that risk was seen as not just preventative, was positive as well. Things around senior leaders and the difference between education and training, making sure that education is embedded into the organisation to ensure that everybody's having risk conversations, building it into everyday discussions, activities, meetings, that kind of thing. Culture came into it quite a bit, ensuring the right attitude, where we're focusing on risk that matters, but also talking about the stakeholder, having a stakeholder framework, understandings, creating a stakeholder matrix to understand the influence of and interests that stakeholders have. So it was a lot around ensuring that we were actually getting a level of engagement around risk. on the governance side, it was interesting. One of our group said it was something they would go away and think a lot more about how risk and governance fits together. Yeah. We had a conversation about the acronyms and the way things have moved from GRC to ESG to and IRM and all the different types of acronyms that are used for risk and how confusing that can be for people, and the fact that if everybody starts talking about ESG, where's the risk bit gone from that? But was GRC and the risk bit in GRC, were there problems with that in the first place? So and we went on to talk about, and I'm sure I've missed all sorts of things, but it's all, Mark did a fantastic job to capture it all. Things like making sure that we are putting together the right kind of reporting going into the decision makers, making that reporting meaningful. So it doesn't just become a tick box exercise, that culturally people get engaged in that decision making and the information they want. Not just something that passes across their desk and they just go, tick, file that.
No, exactly that. And then just some of the stuff, building on that, some of the stuff we talked about was around, I guess, governance, decision-making forums having a clear purpose. So that and then that driving that is around having the authority to make decisions. Similarly, around challenging committees around is there a shared purpose and going in the right direction, because ultimately there's conflicting views, conflicting priorities, and then understanding those different perspectives in the room or the people that are going to be making that decision, understand their needs, which again ultimately ties back to the stakeholders in terms of their interest, their influence, their power, whatever. We did have things around acronyms meaning different things to different people. Know your audience is key, and anything else? There was elements around not only knowing your audience but knowing who's right to make the decision. So we talked, I think Kevin talked around where he reversed the 3 lines of defence effectively, where the first decision point was with the people that knew it and understood it, to then progress to a level that went higher up. Richard talked around conscious decisions. I wouldn't go too much into the organisation, but be clear as to who ultimately makes the decision, rather than sometimes take a consensus could be not the right way to make a decision, and therefore how your risk information or your risk thinking supports that. And then finally, to end, which kind of tees into potential future discussions, is around awareness, both from skills, behaviours, influence, collaboration, to also having an element around independency, easy for me to say, for the risk professionals. So there's not the bias, there's not the influence, but you're presenting a level of information to inform that decision. And I'll pause there for any comments or discussion points on that before I open up the SurveyMonkey and see if you've had fun or not had fun. Any comments around that summary just now? Anything that anyone wants to add? Or are we at the 3 hour, 2.5 hour engagement limit? I think maybe for next time we do 2.5 hours.
I think that was a good summary, to be honest, of the discussions that we've had. I think I've personally found it really interesting listening to some of the perspectives, and really good conversation. So yeah, lots to go out there, I think, for a future session as well.
Yeah, and building on that, hold on. So some of the, thankfully it doesn't tell you for everyone's. So some key takeaways are around effective management is always talking about risk management. Risk should be viewed in a dynamic fashion. Interest and learning for stakeholder engagement leading to better risk decisions. I'll just skim through some of these. There's not one single approach to managing stakeholders in business. Diversity of views and complexity of the challenge of risk leadership. So there's some of the takeaways that people are going to take back to their role. We had 87.5 very useful. too generous, one useful. So we'll take that, and then the key point for us to take away is then what areas should we be looking at. So tools and techniques come through quite prominent there, easy for me to say now, but then risk culture, raising risk behaviours, raising risk profile, risk behaviours, and then ultimately risk leadership development are some of the key topics. So not only will we take a lot of what's on the Muro board, we'll also take this feedback and shape what the next session will be. And on that, we'll then get to, sorry for the jumping around, all embedded in the slide deck, that then gets us to the next steps. So next steps then are around, so we've obviously had a launch event within the next 2 weeks, or 3 weeks actually, to the end of August. We'll collate amongst the committee, the Muro board, the SurveyMonkey, and then shape that as an output for not only yourself, but then we'll look to obviously keep that dissemination ongoing, so it doesn't just become this cohort as we keep reaching out. The next event will be in October, November time, so we're aiming every 3 months just because of not only the planning, but then just the movement of the topics. And then by the end of the year, we'll look to develop kind of 6 findings from the first 2 events, but then a clearer plan as to what we then focus on for 2023. Now that could include, collaboration across a number of IRM SIGs as well as the ICC PM SIGs, which Richard's alluded to in Australia, etc. And then there's, where possible, the intention for us is the improved guidance and thought leadership. So it's that we won't be setting out to produce stuff unless there is clear common understanding and benefit from doing that. And then ultimately, if we go into some of those topics, so risk leadership development, etc., there may be spin-offs or subgroups that require additional focus, i.e. training, development paths, career progression, etc., that may not sit with the full set, but may become a subgroup. And that's us well ahead of schedule, actually. So thank you, and then any questions before we close? So anything to add? Any comments? Thank you for the comments in the chat.
Yes, if I can say something.
Yes.
Okay. My name is Célia Queiroz, and I'm a registered nurse. I worked in Mozambique in remote places during 6 years. And then I'm doing a PhD in international health, and I'm trying to do something related with the management, the risk management, with the focus in this particular environment. But I am a beginner in these matters. So I did a search here on the internet, and I saw your institution, and it's the first time. I like very much to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. And I would like to ask you, for example, for me as a beginner, what you think that could be the best training to start? Because I would like to do something related with that. And if you have something to say about that, I will appreciate.
Yeah, well, one is to, I guess, test, for me, is to test your current environment and where you want to go with it, Celia. So the IRM's got a number of training courses. There are other training courses out there. So the likes of APM and others present a number of risk training courses, both from a kind of beginner through to advanced and qualified, etc. The key for me is understanding or tailoring that training or aligning that training to what works for you, i.e. so for some of us in the project space, the APM is a little bit more aligned, and I'm not going to trick myself up here because I'm on an IRM SIG, but for that purpose is that the people that we put on that training then come away and go, actually, I can then take that back to my day-to-day work. There's the elements of the IRM that may be relevant to you in that healthcare, and I guess the first point I would say is to pull the curriculums and look at what you want to do. But I can follow up with you after this call in terms of that level of training.
Okay.
Unless if anyone else has got anything to add, because I was freewheeling there. But no, let's Celia, pick it up after with me, and we can talk through that for certain.
Okay. Okay, you send me a contact, please, or
Yeah. Yes, absolutely, I will do. David, you're testing if Richard's still with us. I think. So shall we ask Richard to say something about the ICCPM SIG, especially the recent report? Richard, are you still with us? Quickly.
He was just saying he's about to go.
No, I was saying I'm about to go, but that's fine. I don't want to say much, but the ICCPM, International Centre for Complex Project Management in Canberra, does run a risk SIG, and it's management of risk and complexity. But the word complexity doesn't really matter in this context, other than everything we talked about today applies. And it's been going for about 12 months. It's been looking into various perspectives of that, tools and techniques, principles of risk leadership, principles of effective risk management in complexity, and trying. It's now coming to another next question, which is really, so where's it going to go from here? Because it's already had a look at various things. It's put out a couple of papers, and it's done a webinar or two. We think there's a lot of connection. I think there's a lot of connection between what we heard today and what's happening there, but not, I'm presuming, in other places as well. I think we should share information, and I would hope that we can do that either by sharing membership of the different groups and or by sharing, output from the various groups.
Absolutely, Richard. I think collaboration is key, both in terms of attendance, but then also sharing that information. Because we were viewing it from the IRM current setup from SIGs. That's where we've kind of set up. Ultimately, you've been looking at it from the ICCPM. So wherever there's joined up thinking and alignment, then we encourage it, because the more people that are pulling in the right direction, the better for us. Okay. Good.
And, thank you.
No, thank you, and you're nailing it. You're free to go to your bed now. Right? I won't bring you back in, but happy Friday.
Thank God for that.
Breakout room.
I would, Graham, I would second the comments that David and Richard have just made around ICCPM. I'm a member of the ICCPM Risk SIG. One of my challenges is the time of the day, just like Richard's here into the wee hours, and there are times when I just find I can't commit to constantly joining things at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. So
you either take a leaf out of Richard's book and just battle through, or again, there are other ways to collaborate and share information type thing, and that's it. I think where time zones are a challenge, as we know, as we're all doing this virtually, there are abilities to share information and keep everyone in the loop. So the key is how we do that going forward, for sure. Good. Anything else from anyone? And I'll close the call there. Thank you all for your time and your contributions. It's exactly what we're looking for in terms of open forum, open discussion. And thank you all, and we'll be in touch both from an outputs from today's session as well as the next step. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.